I'm Jolene Wynn, and this is the Porn Addict's Wife podcast, episode number 206, If You Just Don't Care Anymore. If your husband is struggling with a pornography problem and you want some help with it and you are not finding the resources that you like, you are in the right place. My name is Jolene Wynn. I am a certified life coach. I am an active member of the LDS faith, and I am the wife of a former porn addict. And on this podcast, I am going to share with you the tools that you need in order to start your healing journey. This is where I'm going to show you how to dive deep into intentional living, how to rekindle connection with your spouse, how to manage all that emotional turmoil that you're feeling, how to break the addiction cycle that you have to your husband's addiction, and tell you all of the ways to do that and start healing. I am so glad that you're here, and I can't wait to get started. Let's go. All right. Hello, my ladies. Good morning. I am so excited to be talking to you guys today. I feel like I have so much to tell you. First of all, if you guys are not subscribed to the podcast, go ahead and click subscribe, because last week I came out with 2 bonus podcast episodes that are amazing. One is an interview that I did with a fellow coach and friend, Marcy Owen. We talked about solid self-love, which was beautiful. She talked about how developing self-love with yourself is about cultivating a relationship with 3 people. And I'll be honest, I was surprised by who those 3 people were. So go check out that episode. And then the second bonus podcast episode that I came out with last week was a full-length interview with Frank Rich. Frank is a colleague and he is also a friend, and he and I sat down and went through basically his entire life story. And he hasn't really shared this in this context in years. And so I was so honored to be able to work with him and to have this conversation. And he is someone who now coaches men through pornography and how to come out on the other side. And he knows how to do that because he conquered his own pornography addiction. And so we talked about how he was introduced to it at a young age and how that developed over time into an addiction, how that affected his relationships, how at one point he even smashed his laptop and threw it in the trash, all the way to his, conversion to Christ, and then how that's led him to where he is now, helping men in his own personal program. And it's just such a beautiful episode. There's actually a full-length video of that on YouTube. Did you guys know I have a YouTube channel? I have a YouTube channel. You can go watch occasionally whenever I remember to make videos. If you search Jolene Wynn Coaching on YouTube, I will pop up. And I will also put the link in the show notes so that you can just click on it where it says like the description of the podcast episode, what it's about. That's called the show notes. And I'll put the link in there so that you guys have easy access to it as well. All right. I had such a great weekend. We had soccer games, which was so fun. And I watched my sister's kids. So I had 8 kids all weekend, which was so fun. They're so easy. Like, they live right next door. I live right next door to my twin sister. And so the kids are more like siblings than cousins. And it was so fun to have them. My husband took my girls on a daddy-daughter camp out, and he also took my niece so that my twin sister and her husband could have like a little anniversary getaway. And so I just had the boys. So it was me and 4 little boys. And so we had ice cream for dinner, and then they watched Star Wars, and it was awesome. And I read my book. And ladies, I'm reading a great book. It's called Bad Therapy: Why the Kids Aren't Growing Up, by Abigail, I don't know how to say her last name, Shrier, something like that. But if you look up Bad Therapy, it's a big yellow cover. I've started reading it. Guys, I'm less than 100 pages in, and I am obsessed. I love this book so much. She brings up such good points. And so if you are interested, go check it out. I really recommend this book. So that's what I've been doing. I hope you guys are doing well. And let's dive into today. And again, this is not a topic that I was planning on doing, but it came to me yesterday. I wrote it all down on my phone, and so we're going to do it. This is for those of you who feel like you just don't care anymore. And this can be about whatever. This can be if you have struggled with your weight forever, or if you have invested in a relationship. It could be your spouse. It could be a child. It could be a best friend or an in-law. Whatever it is that you feel like, I just don't care anymore. And this obviously is not about things we've never cared about. This is alluding to the fact that you used to care and you don't anymore, right? And here's what I want to offer is that there's a lie in this thought. Okay, and that's the lie of indifference, which is what I almost called this podcast episode, is the lie of indifference. But I called it if you just don't care anymore, because I feel like so many of us, that's what we're actually thinking. That's the thought. And the lie is that we're indifferent. And here's what it is. If you were actually indifferent, if you actually did not care either way, and you didn't care, then you wouldn't be listening to this podcast episode. So for those of you who are like, you know what, I just don't even care what my husband does anymore. If you actually didn't care, then you wouldn't be listening to this podcast, okay? If you actually didn't care, then you wouldn't be thinking about it. If you find yourself still thinking about it, you do care. And that's okay, ladies, but it's important not to ignore, okay? So many of us lie to ourselves, tell ourselves that we are indifferent. I'm going to talk about why, but it doesn't actually help us get anywhere. This is why we stay stuck, because it's not true. And this is when we're trying to just think our way out of our feelings. We're trying to convince ourselves logically that we don't feel the way that we feel anymore, okay? So we're trying to say, oh, I just don't care anymore in our heads, but emotionally we're still affected. Emotionally we still do care. Emotionally part of us still cringes or still wishes it was different. Does that make sense? And ignoring this isn't going to make it go away. And when we pretend that we don't care and it's not actually true, when it's not actually true that we don't care, we don't face the consequences of caring. Meaning, when we do care, there's an emotional consequence. And when we are lying to ourselves, telling ourselves that we are indifferent, we are ignoring those emotional consequences. They still come up, we're just pretending that they don't, right? We ignore the emotional reactions and then we just shove them down and power through, and then they just come up later, right? It's not that you don't care, it's that you gave up, right? It gets too hard to try, too hard to emotionally invest when you don't get the return that you're expecting. And I think that this is more true. It's not that it's that you don't care anymore, it's that you've reached a point where it's too hard to care. Does this make sense? So maybe at the beginning of this episode, you started thinking about one thing, but if you need to make a little readjustment, now's the time. We're talking about something that you tell yourself you don't care about anymore, but in reality, that's not true. The truth is that you do care, and you did care, right? And you feel like it's too hard to care anymore. So what our brain is telling us is that we just give up. And this is going to be a podcast that I do another day, which is resignation. And resignation is not the same as not caring, okay? Today we're going to talk about not caring. And I'll do another podcast later about resignation, but that also doesn't mean that you don't care. It means that you give up, okay? Often what we mean when this comes up isn't that we don't care, it's that it's too hard to care. Meaning that we have invested emotionally and we were subconsciously expecting to see our emotional effort reciprocated by the other person, or at least acknowledged by them. Right? Think of any relationship that you're in. Maybe this is with your spouse, and we'll go through more examples in a minute. Maybe this is with your spouse or your parent or your best friend or a sister or whoever. Think of that person, that relationship that came to your mind. That's the one that we need to think about, okay? So think of that one, right? Sometimes when we've invested emotionally over time, then when we have a subconscious expectation to have that investment reciprocated in a certain way, when we start to notice that that is not happening, that's when our brain says this is getting too hard. Does this make sense? And sometimes we don't even need to see it reciprocated. Sometimes we just want our side acknowledged. We want our spouse to acknowledge how hard this is for us. We think it will be better if he actually acknowledged how difficult this is, how much effort we're putting into this, right? And when that is all happening subconsciously, then we are going to subtly create resentment. For those of you who joined us in the the Healing Resentment Masterclass that I did last week, this is what we talked about. This is what creates resentment, is this unfairness. I'm putting all of this in and I'm not getting a return. I expect things to be reciprocated. Now, when you are in a relationship, it is very normal and very natural to expect some things to be reciprocated. That is a very healthy symbiotic relationship, especially with a spouse. Except when you are going in with a certain subconscious set of expectations, when you are not choosing these intentionally and with the other person, then this can lead to resentment because you have a subconscious list, a list that you're not even totally aware of in your brain of what you think they should and shouldn't be doing. and what it should look like on their end. So you're saying, all right, I'm showing up, I'm listening to podcasts, I'm going to therapy, I'm doing all the things, I'm listening to this coach, I'm doing all of this personal work and effort, and you're not doing anything, and that's not fair, right? I'm investing, I'm working on the relationship, I need to see you do it too. And we expect it to be shown in a certain way. Ladies, so many of you get so frustrated because you're like, my husband tells me he's working on it, but he hasn't scheduled a therapist yet. There's so much work that someone who's overcoming a pornography problem it can do internally. It's 99.9% internal, okay? So all of that is stuff that you're not going to be able to see. So notice when you have an expectation of it looking a certain way, you expect that him working on it is going to look like him going to therapy, him going to a support group, him having a sponsor, him having an accountability person that he talks to multiple times a day. Right? So when you have a subconscious expectation for that other person of what it looks like for them to be showing you that they are also emotionally invested, then that's going to create resentment on your end. I also have a podcast episode. You guys can go listen to it. It's called I Don't Want to Care More Than He Does. And I talk about that kind of dynamic there. Okay? So normally we've invested emotionally and it's too hard because we have these expectations of them showing us that it's reciprocated and it's not. And it's not even being acknowledged in the way that we want it to be. We want praise, ladies. Our pride really wants praise. We want praise for our efforts. We want somebody to acknowledge all the hard work that we're doing. We want someone to tell us, I am so impressed with the effort that you've put into cultivating this relationship. We want that. We think that would be really nice. And it does sound nice. It's always nice. However, when that is the thing that you're expecting and the kind of your reason for investing, then if you don't get that back, then then that's when our brain says this is too hard because I'm not getting the return on my investment, okay? Or perhaps we reach this point when sometimes we have a subconscious hope that our effort on our part, our emotional investment, will change the situation or circumstance, okay? Does this make sense? Tell me if this resonates. Okay, we're hoping that the amount of work and effort that we bring to the table will somehow change a circumstance. It'll change the other person. Maybe this will make them like me. Maybe if I do all of these things, maybe if I just put everything into this friendship, then this friend will change and start seeing me differently. Maybe if I show up and do all the work and I do everything that I possibly can, maybe then my husband will change and stop watching porn, right? We're hoping that our effort, our emotional investment, our caring will somehow change the other person. And when we expect that, even subconsciously, then when that doesn't happen, that's when our brain says this is too hard, okay? Maybe if I try hard enough and do all the right things, she'll like me, right? Maybe if I do everything just right, my husband will stop watching porn. But when those things don't happen, it becomes harder and harder to continually invest emotionally because the outcome that we desire isn't happening. So we feel exhausted and frustrated, and then we say, I just don't care anymore. Does that make sense? Now, here are some examples, and then I'm going to talk about how to solve it, okay? So, for example, pretending that you don't care what your sister-in-law thinks of you isn't true if you still think about it when you get together. If you still ruminate on it, on what she said at the reunion last year. If you're still stuck on what she said to you as like a side remark when you were standing in the line taking family pictures, right? If that still comes up, then it's not true that you don't care. Because again, if you actually didn't care, you would never think about it. It wouldn't even be in your brain, okay? You do care, and ladies, that is okay. It is okay to acknowledge, and maybe it's not all of you, maybe there's just a part of you, okay? This is one of the best tools that I give, and one of the things that's helped me most is when you have some kind of acknowledgement of what's going on internally, it doesn't have to be all of you, because maybe that doesn't feel true. Maybe not all of you cares, but maybe there's just like a small part, and that's the part that we need to have compassion for. That's the part we're looking at. So you just say, okay, maybe there's part of me that still cares what she thinks, and I'm going to talk to that part of me. Okay, because that part is trying to talk to me and I'm trying to ignore it, okay? You do care, and that's okay. So we just need to accept it and process the emotional baggage. Process how we felt when she said all of those things. Process all of those interactions that are coming to your mind that you're still holding on to and haven't let go of yet, right? Process all of that emotional baggage, let it go, and now we can say, now what do I want to do? I can't control her response to me, so I can learn to let that go, but I can control how I show up in the relationship, right? Am I being myself? Am I people pleasing to try to get her to like me, right? So notice how when we actually acknowledge that we do care, we're able to process that emotional baggage that's still getting triggered. Does this make sense? So when we actually just truthfully acknowledge it, then we can process it and we can let it go. We can stop carrying it around. When we carry it around, that's what keeps getting triggered by more and more interactions, which is why we tend to want to avoid those, or we just resist those, or we have the story about how terrible they are and all of those things. And that's what creates more resentment, more bitterness, more hurt. And that's when we want to say, I'm done, right? And that's really the way to solve it. And then I'll do one more example. The way to solve this idea of like, I don't care anymore, or emotionally investing, is to decide on purpose what you care about. Just do it on purpose. Most of our problems, ladies, most of the pain and suffering that we feel in our life is created because of thoughts we are unaware of or unintentionally running in the background, which is why this is so powerful for you guys to learn on this podcast how to what is possible, how you can start retraining, what it could look like if you start retraining your brain, right? This is what I work with on my clients, is actively retraining your brain, because our brain gets stuck in certain patterns. And when we're not aware of that, then all of these subconscious thoughts are going to create emotional reactions, and those emotional reactions are going to get triggered. And then they're just going to stay there and fester because we're going to shove them down and power through. And then we're just going to have all this emotional baggage that we're just carrying around. So when we decide on purpose, that's when we say, I'm choosing to think this thought, even though I know that this could be the emotional response. For example, I'm choosing to believe that I'm not okay with my husband watching porn, even though I know that that means that if he does, I'm going to feel negative emotion. I'm choosing the negative emotion so that if he watches porn and that negative emotion comes up, I don't have to resent him for it. I can just be like, oh, this is actually exactly what I want to feel, because I don't want to be okay with it. So decide on purpose what you care about, okay? And redecide today to continue caring about something, even if it's hard, okay? Decide something new. You can say, you know what? I'm deciding to no longer care about this. That means retraining your brain, processing all of the emotional baggage, redirecting thoughts, okay? All of that. Or redeciding to care. You say, you know what? I actually want to care what my relationship with my husband looks like. I actually want to care if my husband's watching porn. I actually want to care what I think about myself when I look in the mirror. I actually want to care about my kids and whether or not they want to come home. I actually want to care about certain things in my life. I'm not just going to say this is too hard, I just don't care anymore, because it's not true. So decide on purpose what you care about and redecide to continue caring about things, okay? And then alter your behavior to align with what you can control, okay? Because so much of you are going to be like, all right, well, what does that mean? If I care about my husband's behavior, if I care about that, then there's got to be stuff that I have to do about it, right? Then I'm going to have to keep changing my behavior, keep trying to change him. No, alter your behavior to refocus and center on what you can control and release the outcome if it's not in your control. So again, with this example of pretending like you don't care if your sister-in-law likes you or not, at the end, we're talking about, okay, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to acknowledge, number one, become aware that I do care. Number two, accept it and make sure it's not a problem. Number three, process the emotional baggage. Step number four, choose a new thought. Do I want to care? Do I not want to care? Step number five, retrain your brain. This is what I do in my program. Those 5 steps over and over and over and over, okay? That's in the middle. And then part of that is saying, I can't control her. So I'm going to stop trying to people please her in order to change her behavior. I am going to decide what I am willing to invest in this relationship emotionally, physically, mentally, and decide that on purpose and alter my behavior to stick with that, but also not take responsibility for whether or not she likes me. I'm just giving her permission not to like me, but also saying, even if she doesn't, this is how I want to show up. I want to show up as a person who is kind. I want to show up as a person who doesn't hold grudges. I want to show up as a person who enjoys the experience once a year at the family reunion. I want to show up as the person who she can call when she says, hey, we're driving across the country to come visit. Can we stay at your house? And I say yes, right? It's all about you deciding what is in your control and sticking with that and letting go of the responsibility of what's not, okay? I was with someone recently who said, if you take enough anxiety medication, then you won't care if your kids behave that way. Isn't that fascinating? And it was said partially in jest, but that statement was an offer to what is often seen as better, which is to not care, right? And here's my response to that. I actually want to care. I actually want to live my life caring. I don't want to live my life not caring about things. I actually want to care if my kids misbehave. I want to care if my husband is or isn't watching pornography. I want to care about certain things, okay? And I actually want that, and I think you want that too. So if we do the example of your husband watching pornography, pretending that you don't care anymore if your husband watches porn is incorrect. And especially if you're listening to this podcast episode, you do care. It's a huge sign to you, okay, that you actually care. Because if you didn't care, you wouldn't be listening to this. You do care. You care that he watched it. You care that it affected you. You care because emotionally it sucks a little bit. And that's okay. Step number 1, we just have to become aware that we actually still do care. Stop lying to yourself. Indifference is a lie, okay? You're not indifferent, and that's okay. I don't want to be indifferent, and I don't think you do either. So awareness, acceptance, it's totally okay that you do care still, okay? There's part of you that doesn't want to care, and that's different, okay? And the part of you that doesn't want to care is the part that's tired. The part that feels defeated, the part that feels hopeless, the part that has all of this emotional baggage that has just been heavy to carry around and it feels like it's never going to go anywhere. That's the part of you that's tired and doesn't want to care, but you do. So step number 3 is processing all of that emotional baggage, all of that pain that you're holding on to. We need to process it and let it go. That is a skill that you can develop and learn. It is a skill, a physical skill, like riding a bike. Okay, it's just that nobody's ever taught you how to do it. So when you learn how to do it, that's when all that emotional baggage can go away. Step number 4, we actually get to redecide or decide on purpose how we're going to think and feel about this. Okay, what new thought do I want to have? Do I even want to have a new thought? Okay, this is where we can disconnect lies that make your husband's behavior mean something about you, but also keep the ones that align with your values. My husband's pornography problem does not mean anything about me. It took me a long time to really create a strong division of that in my brain, to really break up that lie. And that's what I work with my clients on so often. That's where it's connected. That's why it hurts so bad. It's because we've connected it to ourselves, right? So when you do that, when you learn how to break up that lie, that's when you can choose something new, right? So I broke up with the lie. I chose to disconnect, to no longer decide to believe that my husband's pornography problem had anything to do with me, but I chose to keep the thought. I redecided to keep believing that I do care if he watches pornography, okay? But then I get to step number 5, which is to retrain my brain, to become aware of when my brain wants to fall back in those old patterns. And the path's exactly the same here. And then I get to release. When we look at this as a whole, that's when we get to say, okay, here's what's in my control and here's what's not. My husband's behavior is not in my control. Your husband's behavior is not in your control. Let's release the responsibility for it because it's not yours. And then just focus on what you can control, which is yourself. How do I want to show up? How do I want to emotionally show up in this relationship? Focusing on what I can control, not expecting it to create something different in his behavior. Not saying, all right, well, I'm willing to do this as long as he meets me halfway, as I'm willing to invest in this relationship, as long as he starts showing me that he's invested too, and I want it to look like X, Y, and Z, right? This is us saying, you know what? I'm going to show up how I want to. I want to show up as a wife who puts in all the effort. I want to show up as the wife who's willing to do the hard things. I want to show up as the wife who is willing to take that step first and then have him follow. Right? Does this make sense? Ladies, I want you to take an honest look. I want to offer that you do this with whatever area in your life, whether that's your spouse, your body, a different relationship, and examine anything that you feel like you just don't care about anymore, because I want to offer that that's probably not true. And if it's not, then go through this step, go through this process, and start acknowledging that you do care so that you can actually work through that emotional baggage and let it go. Otherwise, this pattern is just going to continue. And I don't think you actually want to go through life not caring. Because if that were true, we'd already be there. You do want to care. We want to experience the positive that comes from caring. With that comes the 50-50. That's the part that we often resist. We want all the positive and not the negative, but life is 50-50. There's going to be both, and it's totally okay. So choose it on purpose. All right, ladies, I love you so much, and I'll see you guys next week in a brand new episode, so take care. All right, ladies, if you enjoyed this podcast, then I want to invite you to come join my coaching program. This is where we take everything on the podcast and we actually get to apply it in order to transform your life. And I know that that is a big promise, but it's 100% true. On the podcast, it's like learning how to ride a bike. It's like reading a book, an instruction manual via audio on how to ride a bike. And my coaching program is where you actually ride the bike. And that is what creates the transformation. This is what actually enables you to go from point A to point B, to actually create the transformation that you are seeking. If you are feeling stuck, if you are feeling like you are loving everything, but you just can't see the end from where you are now, then I want to help you. Come work with me one-on-one. I have a lifetime access program, which means it doesn't expire. You come work with me, I will help you every step of the way and work with you personally to make sure that you get where you want to go. I can't wait to see you there. Head to my website today, jolenewind.com, and sign up.